Hey traders, welcome back to Valores Capital. On today's video, we're gonna go through the market update and we're also gonna take a look at some of the stocks that I'm gonna be watching for next week. Remember guys that this video is for informational purposes only, is based just on my personal opinion and is not financial advice. Also guys, remember that if at any point of this video you find any value, make sure to subscribe to the channel. So let's start here with the yes. Let's take a look at some of the action that happened this week, and one of the things that I want to do is go back to the first video of this month. Remember, guys, that we were talking about a possible rally in September for the SPX. If you remember correctly, we were talking about that possibility when we had this consolidation near that all-time high in the ES, and we were looking for that continuation to the upside, right? And then what happened is that we had this pretty strong sell-off. And on last week's video, we were talking about waiting for some confirmation before we start buying the dip. So this is a pretty strong confirmation, and I really like the price action for that thesis of a rally in September. So let's take a look at what happened this week. And for that, I want to take a look. I want to take a look at the SPX. But before we dive into the price action, I do want to talk about these breadth indicators that we were talking about last week. If you guys remember correctly, I was talking about the kind of the only green flag that I was seeing for the bulls, and was that we were pretty oversold in the 5-day average percentage of stocks. So that was kind of the only thing that I was watching, and this is actually a pretty useful tool. So I do recommend you guys to take a look at it. You can use the Nasdaq Composite, or you can use the overall percentage of stocks that are above that 5-day moving average. So what is actually pretty interesting is that we went from pretty oversold into pretty overbought. So I do think that that's something that I want to consider going into next week, at least for those first couple of days, or perhaps going into that FOMC. So kind of the two scenarios that I'm going to be looking, and let's jump into the chart of the SPX for that. Kind of the two scenarios that I'm going to be looking for are either a continuation of this move to the upside before the FOMC meeting, or a little bit of a back end feeling before that FOMC meeting. So let's take a look at what do I mean in the chart here of the SPX. So first of all, the SPX continues to trade below this gap of resistance. Now the question is, if we happen to see a continuation to the upside, printing a new all-time high before the FOMC meeting on Wednesday, and then having a pullback after the rate cut is announced. Now, I do believe that even if we get a pullback after the rate cut, that is most likely an opportunity to buy the SPX and then look for a continuation to the upside. Now, the other scenario would be that we had a pullback before the FOMC and then having that rally after the announcement of the rate cut. I do think that either scenario is most likely going to be a buying the dip opportunity. And one of the reasons that I mentioned this is because of the price action that we're seeing on the SPX. This was a pretty nice shake to the downside, but you can see that we reclaim that positive momentum in my indicator, and also we are back above those moving average. You can see that we reclaimed that 50, and we also reclaimed that 20 SMA. And what is actually pretty interesting is that we never went negative on that 20 SMA. So that's actually a pretty bullish sign of the price. But we do have to take into consideration that we are starting to be short-term overbought. So that is kind of what I'm going to be looking for the SPX. And if we take a look at some of the other indexes, like the Qs, the expectation is going to be pretty similar. You can see right here that the Qs actually closed this gap that we had before the sell-off. And the expectation is going to be the same, right? Are we going to see a little bit of a move to the upside pre-FOMC and then having that pullback into the anchor VWAP before a continuation to the upside? Or are we going to have the pullback and then the continuation to the upside? Now, the thesis for the SPX is a new all-time high, and the thesis for the Qs is going to be a close of this gap that we had in price. So you can see that this one is lagging a little bit, but I am expecting also a continuation in the Qs, and it's going to be the same for the IWM. So pretty nice action in the IWM. The IWM was lagging in these couple of days, but we had a pretty strong gap and go. We are back above those moving averages, and the expectation is that most likely we're gonna retest these highs that we had in July. So those are going to be the three setups that I'm going to be watching for next week. I do want to get long the SPY. I want to get long the Qs, and I also want to get long the IWM. Now, the way that you want to do it, you can do it with calls, with the futures, or perhaps with the leverage ETFs of these names. So those are the three main setups that I'm going to be watching. But also, if we're talking stocks, I am watching Netflix. This one is looking pretty nice. NFLX. This one is looking pretty nice, and I really like the pattern that is developing here in Netflix. So you can see right here that we had a really nice flag. This was a pretty controlled pullback, and a price held that 50 daily moving average. So I am expecting a breakout here pretty soon in Netflix. Let's see how it happens. Perhaps we're gonna get a break and a test of these highs, and then perhaps a little bit of a pullback into that anchor VWAP for a continuation. That would be the perfect setup for me. But of course, we have to follow price. This is going to be the first setup that I'm going to be looking for. And then if we go back to last week's video, we were talking about Tesla. We were talking about this possible opportunity as a buy the dip into that 20 SMA. And you can see that this one worked pretty nicely. Now the expectation with Tesla, you can see right here that we have this base, and you can see this BCP a type of pattern that we're seeing on price, meaning that volatility is contracting as buyers are getting stronger and sellers are losing the control of price. So perhaps we're going to get a little bit more of a BCP and then a really strong break to the upside. This is a setup that I really want to get long. So this one is looking pretty nice. And then finally, I am taking a look at Apple again, a little bit of a lagger, but you can see right here that perhaps we're going to get a little bit of a head and shoulders before a break above this base. I do think that Apple is going to retest those new all-time highs, and then perhaps a continuation to the upside. So don't let Apple out of your watch list. Now, in terms of the semiconductors, we had a pretty nice rally in the semiconductors. NVDA is one that I'm watching. This was a pretty nice bounce, and I do think that we're going to get more opportunities to trade NVIDIA. Now, the question is if we're going to close the gap and then having a pullback, or we're just going to have a pullback. I prefer to get this name on weakness, but of course, using that anchor VWAP as my guide for then having a really nice trade to the upside. So that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for for next week. I do expect that even if we get the pullback before FOMC or after FOMC, most likely that's going to be a buying opportunity. The patterns are looking pretty strong for the bulls, so I do want to continue to trade in the path of least resistance. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Have an amazing weekend, and I will see you on future videos. Take care, and bye-bye.